This tank weighed 93 pounds. A German reconnaissance pilot photographing it from 3,000 feet would have sworn it weighed 30 tons. And that is exactly what the United States Army wanted him to think. In January 1944, the Army activated a unit of 1,100 men and gave it a job unlike any other in the war. They were not there to take ground. They were not there to hold a line. Their job was to be an army that did not exist, and they did it more than 20 times across France and Germany. And the strangest part isn't the rubber tanks. Their deadliest weapon was a sound, one you could hear 15 miles away. They may have saved tens of thousands of lives. And then they were ordered never to speak about it for 50 years. Officially, they were the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. History remembers them as the Ghost Army. The idea came from the British, who had used deception brilliantly at El Alamein in 1942. Two American planners, Ralph Ingersoll and Billy Harris, built the American version, and Colonel Harry L. Reeder took command. But the recruiting was the strange part. The Army did not go looking for the toughest infantrymen it could find. It went looking for painters, designers, architects, actors, set builders. Men pulled out of art schools in New York and Philadelphia and out of advertising agencies. Some of those names are worth pausing on. Bill Blass, who would become one of America's most famous fashion designers, served in this unit. So did the painter Ellsworth Kelly. So did the wildlife artist Arthur Singer and the photographer Art Kane. The unit was activated on the 20th of January 1944. By May, they were in Britain, based near Stratford-upon-Avon, a few weeks before D-Day. They were sent to war with paintbrushes, sound trucks, and 93-pound tanks. Here is what they actually did with them. Deception number 1, the inflatable army. The visual work belonged to the 603rd Camouflage Engineers. They were equipped with inflatable tanks, cannons, jeeps, trucks, even aircraft. The men blew them up with air compressors. A rubber M4 Sherman weighed about 93 pounds. The real thing weighed 30 tons. At a few hundred yards or from the air, you could not tell them apart. But here is the detail that gives the whole operation away as genius rather than gimmick. They camouflaged them badly, deliberately. Think about that for a second. Every instinct of a soldier is to hide equipment properly, but a perfectly hidden tank is a useless decoy. The Ghost Army needed German aerial reconnaissance to find their tanks, so they draped the netting just carelessly enough to leave a gun barrel showing, a track visible, a shape that a photo interpreter back in Germany would circle in pencil and mark as armor. Notably, a fake tank only works if someone is meant to find it. Deception number 2. They didn't just fake vehicles. They faked places. In a matter of hours, the 603rd could build a dummy airfield, a motor pool, an artillery battery, an entire troop encampment from nothing in an empty field. And they understood something most military planners didn't. An armored division is not just tanks. It is the mess of ordinary human life that surrounds tanks. So they added it. Tire tracks churned into the mud by real vehicles driving in circles. Cooking fires. Rubbish. And laundry. Actual laundry, hung out on clotheslines, so that when the German cameras came over, the photographs showed soldiers washing, drying in the sun outside a division that was not there. That is the level they were operating at. Not, does this look like a tank? But, does this look like 10,000 men living here? Deception number 3, and this is the one from the opening. Fooling a camera is one thing. Fooling an enemy who is close enough to listen is another. That job went to the 3132 Signal Service Company Special, and their weapon was sound. Working with engineers from Bell Labs, a team went to Fort Knox and recorded the real thing. Armored columns moving, infantry units on the march, bridges being built, engines, tracks, voices. Those recordings went onto wire recorders, the technology that came just before magnetic tape. Then, for each operation, the sounds could be mixed like a film soundtrack. If the story they wanted the Germans to believe was an armored division arriving after dark, they built that scene in audio and played it back through enormous amplifiers and speakers mounted on half-tracks. The result carried up to 15 miles. 15 miles. Sit with that. German troops lying in a tree line in the dark, hearing tank engines and shouted orders and the grind of tracks somewhere ahead of them in the night, reporting an armored buildup back up the chain, and there was nothing out there at all. Just a truck, a speaker, and a recording made in Kentucky. But sound and rubber only got them halfway. The third deception had to fool human beings. Deception number 4, the radio war. The Germans were not only watching and listening to the battlefield, they were listening to Allied radio traffic, and they were good at it. Intercept operators learned the signal patterns of specific Allied divisions. They even learned individual operators, because every radio operator has a rhythm, a personal style on the key, as distinctive as handwriting. So the Ghost Army learned to impersonate them. Their operators would study the sending style of the man they were replacing, then take over his traffic, so that when a real division quietly moved somewhere else, its radio chatter appeared to stay exactly where it had always been. The Germans went on hearing a division that had already gone. 3 deceptions, layered on top of each other. The enemy could see the unit, hear the unit, and intercept the unit. It still wasn't there. If you're new here, this is the kind of story we dig into every week. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Deception number 5, and their first real test came 2 weeks after D-Day. The Allies had towed entire artificial harbors across the Channel to Normandy, the Mulberry Harbors, and those harbors were now critical. Everything coming ashore came through them. If German artillery ranged in on them, the invasion's supply line was in trouble. So the Ghost Army built a second one, out of light. At night, they simulated a Mulberry Harbor with lights on the water, in the wrong place, hoping German gunners would range in on the glow instead of the real thing. It was, in the plainest terms, a unit of artists asking the enemy to shell them instead. Deception number 6, the port of Brest. By late summer 1944, the Germans holding the Atlantic port of Brest were dug in hard. The entire Ghost Army was put to work convincing them that the force surrounding the city was far larger than it actually was. Rubber tanks in the fields, sound trucks after dark, radio traffic from divisions that were somewhere else entirely. All of it aimed at a single outcome: keep the German commander convinced he was outnumbered, so he stays where he is and does not counterattack and does not slip out. Every hour they held that illusion was an hour real American units did not have to fight for. Deception number 7, the part that had nothing to do with equipment at all. German intelligence also gathered information the oldest way there is, from people, from what was seen in a town, from what was overheard, so the Ghost Army performed. Officers put on the insignia of divisions they did not belong to and drove staff cars through French towns where they would be seen. Men sat in cafes and bars and talked, a little too loudly, about units and movements that did not exist, knowing the story would travel. And it is worth being clear about the risk. These men carried almost nothing to fight with. Their tanks were rubber. Their guns were canvas and air. Their security came from a single combat engineer unit, the 406. If the enemy ever called the bluff and came at them properly, 1,100 artists and radio operators would have been standing in an open field with nothing. Every one of those tricks was rehearsal. The last one was the real performance. Deception number 8, the Rhine. By March 1945, the last great natural barrier into Germany was the Rhine, and the Allies had to get across it. The Germans knew it too. The only question was where. So the Ghost Army answered it with the wrong answer. They staged a crossing that was never going to happen. Fake armor massing on the riverbank, the sound of an army assembling in the dark. Radio traffic thick with the signatures of divisions that were miles away. Everything designed to pull German attention and German reserves to the wrong stretch of river, while the real crossing went in elsewhere. It was the largest and most consequential thing they ever did, and by then, they were very good at it. This was a unit that had spent a year learning how an army sounds, looks, and talks, and could now reproduce all three on demand. Then they were told to forget all of it, because here is what happened when the war ended. Nothing. Publicly, nothing at all. The Ghost Army's work was classified. The men went home in July 1945 and were ordered to say nothing about what they had done. Not to friends, not to family, not to each other in public. And that order did not lift after a year or a decade. Their story stayed secret for more than 50 years, until it was finally declassified in 1996. Think about what that means at the human level. Men who had spent the war as professional deceivers came home and were handed one more deception to maintain, this time about themselves. Asked what they did in the war, they had to be vague. Some of their families believed they had done nothing much at all, and many of them died before 1996. They went to their graves having never been allowed to say what they were part of. Notably, when the truth finally came out, it changed how the Army thought about deception entirely. No unit in the modern U.S. Army traces its formal lineage from the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. Officially, the line ends, but the ghost patch didn't. Today's psychological operations and information operations communities, the people whose profession is influence and deception, adopted it informally as their own. And on the 3rd of November, 2022, the men of the 23rd were made honorary members of the U.S. Army Psychological Operations Regiment. Then, finally, the recognition. On the 1st of February 2022, the Ghost Army Congressional Gold Medal Act was signed into law, and in 2024 the medal was presented, the highest honor Congress can give. 80 years after they did the work, almost all of them were already gone. 1,100 men, rubber tanks, a record player on a half-track, and a talent for lying. They spent the war convincing the enemy of things that were not true, and then spent 50 years unable to tell anyone the one thing that was. Subscribe to Forgotten Frontlines for the WW2 stories, history left half told. Share this one with the history buffs in your life. Follow for more Forgotten History.